Hi, today we will go through the another Angular architecture topic, which is dependency injection. If you have seen my other video where I tried to implement a very simple approach towards dependency injection and how Angular manages it using pure TypeScript, you should be familiar with this diagram. On very high level, this diagram provides an overview that if you have some kind of reusable services that you need to provide to a dependency injection container, or you can say a registry, then the consumer of these services do not need to create an instance of these classes themselves. The instance creation part will be taken care by the DI framework itself, meaning you just specify where to provide the user service, for example, and based on that, dependency injection container will take care where to create the instance and how many components can share the same instances. And this is very important to understand because it has lots of performance issue, data accuracy issue, and the architecture part. As you can see here, we have a couple of services here. We will only look at the user service in this video, where we will try to provide user service to the DI container, and we will try to use into three components. One is app component, users, and user detail. Okay, so if I go to the another diagram here, this is what we will try to do today. We will have a app component and we will inject user service into the app component. That means an instance will be created and it will be shared with the app component. And since app component is the root which hosts user component and it will host list of user details component, the same instance will be shared between the all three components plus user component. Then we will try to provide this service into different level and see how it impact the instance creation. So let's go to the code here. Here I have a service called user service, and in this service I have kept two variables. One is a service ID variable and another is a static variable called instance count. Why static? Because if it is static, it is not related with the instance of a when you create an instance of an object, it will be shared. Okay, and every time you create a new instance, constructor will be called. So whenever user service instance is created, we will increase this ID by 1. So initially 0, first instance created, it would be 1, and we will log the count into the console to verify the count. And I have a service function here which just return the user instance count. Okay, initially I'm injecting this service into a root component called app component. My app component hosts a router outlet, and in the router outlet I have a route defined for users which loads the user component. So if I go to user component, I have a for loop, and inside a for loop I'm rendering a child component called user details. So if I go to user details, I'm printing the first name and last name, and this is the output I'm looking at here. So if I just inspect the elements here and go to the Angular Dev Tools, you can see I have app component as a root here, which contains a child app users. And based on the API response, I have got number of app user detail components here. You can see in users API, I am getting, let me just refresh one more time to show the API response. I am getting the 30 user detail. That means I would have the 30 app detail components here, object here. Now, let me refresh one more time and we will observe the logs. Let me zoom into the logs so that we can view it properly. So now, let me highlight it. Look at this one. We have the user service constructor called and the instance count is increased as 1 here. Okay. Then let me just step here. Then we have the app component constructor called and we are printing the ID. Same goes for the user component here. So here is my user component and here I am getting the same instance ID here in app component. And since my API is returning 30 user details, for loop is rendering 3030 time user detail component and all of them are using the same instance ID of the user service here. So now let's do something different. What I will do now, I will keep the providers in app component and I will go to the users component now and I will provide a separate instance of the user service. So as soon as I say provide the user service in user component, look at the output now. Let me highlight it again. So the first thing, app component has providers. That's why we got a first instance count here and a user service count is 1. And then we said we will provide into user component as well. Because of that, another instance has been created. You can see user service constructor called again and we increment the count by 1. And the same instance will be passed to the user component. However, interesting part is look at those user detail component, child components. So those 30 user detail components are sharing the user service which is created for its parent user component and not the app component. Okay, so this is very important. So if you have any instance specific variables or method in app component, they will not return the same value as the user details. Let's go one more step further. Now I will try to inject the user service inside user detail as well. What does it mean? In our diagram, we are saying right now we are having something like this. We are providing two instances here and this is service instance 1 as we can see in the console log and this is service instance 2. Now what if we provide user service instance to directly here? Like let me copy this arrow and paste it here and let's see here. What will happen if you provide the user detail component, user service into user detail component? So as soon as you save this one and you can go and check the user console. Let me just zoom, make it a little bit bigger now. And let me just use the highlight color. So first app component will get created and it will create a new user instance, user service instance with ID 1. Then we have provided user service into user component as well. That's why we got a user service instance 2 here. And since we provided user service into user detail component and this component is rendered 30 times for inside a for loop, each render will create a new instance of a user service and that is why you would get different instance for each render. And you see we have the instance count as 32. We have 3030 user detail components, 31 for user component and 32 for app component. That is why we have 32 instances here. And this is why it is important because let's say if you go ahead and let me stop the screen draw. If you go ahead and this is how we have now. For now, we have something like this and paste again here and I put it here. We can ignore the directions. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let me just put the numbering properly here and here 5. So in this case, each individual component has its own instance of a service. And this is why performance matter. As you can see in the for loop, I was getting from the network API 3030 component and we got 30 instances of the service here. Okay, and if you keep, let's say, local property here, private in the service, sorry, not here. If you go here and if you put a private, and I would just say users of type users, and if you set this value here, this dot users, user response dot users, this instance will be like, this instance will contain copy of the user response here, which is 30, and you're calling it multiple times. So you would have those many instances rendered. Again, the most important topic is the API call. Now, if I refresh this, look at the API calls, how many API calls we are getting. Because each render is creating an instance and we're calling this kind of user service here. And this is calling the API again and again. So this is also one of the performance issue. So this is very important where you are providing the service. Now, if I go back, I would remove from the child element the injection providers for the user service here. So I will take it out. So now I should have only two. I should have only two IDs, instance IDs here. And if I take it out from the users component again, I would have only one instance which is shared among all the users. And if you go to the network tab, if you refresh, you would have only one call here. Okay. So this is very important. When you create a service, you need to define its scope and you need to understand how that instance is shared between its child components. Thank you.